Commercially, Canadian rock music in the late 90s and early 2000s was in good health, both on MuchMusic and FM radio. But musically, it seemed to be in dire need of fresh ideas. This may be thanks in part to the overwhelming domestic and global success of Nickelback's How You Remind Me, and its million-selling album, Silver Side Up, causing numerous copycats to break through in their wake at home and abroad. But there were others coming up during that time to make the national rock landscape more interesting. There was also a new wave of bands whose influences pulled more expressly from punk and hardcore, even if some did so in a pop-leaning fashion, with Ajax Ontario's Sum 41 and Mississauga's Billy Talent being two of the biggest examples. Another of those bands, and one of the heaviest to experience that kind of success, was St. Catharines' Alexisonfire. Against all the odds, a band whose name you're not initially sure how to pronounce, who christened themselves after the website link of an adult actress who later tried suing them, and whose primary vocalist is a throat-shattering screamer, had been catapulted into the Canadian mainstream. Their 2002 self-titled debut was a rip-roaring statement of intent from a band whose members were, in some cases, still fresh out of high school. As the band got more and more buzz online and off in the years that followed, they'd go from rapping their demos in old math homework all the way to having 4 top 10 albums in their home country. But perhaps the most glowing distillation of what made Alexisonfire a great band came from their 2004 sophomore album, Watch Out, which celebrated its 20th anniversary back in June. Here's how it came together and why it stands tall as one of the great Canadian emo and post-hardcore albums. Alexisonfire were formed in St. Catharines, Ontario in 2001 by members of 3 local bands whom had all happened to split up around the same time. Hamilton-born guitarist Wade McNeil and bassist Chris Steele were both playing in a punk band, guitarist/clean vocalist Dallas Green was fronting a melodic rock outfit, and lead vocalist George Pettit, a native of nearby Grimsby, Ontario, was playing bass in a Swedish-style metal band. Drummer Jesse Inglevics, who'd also been playing in a local punk band and was jamming with Wade at the time, would complete the lineup, and Alexisonfire was born. Yes, Alexisonfire, not Alex is on fire. After all, what kind of an idiot would name a band Alex is on Fire? Their name actually originates from Alexis Fire, an adult film star claiming to be the world's only lactating contortionist stripper, whom Dallas learned about while watching the Discovery Channel. Her website URL at that time was www.alexisonfire.com. As such, Alexisonfire, the band's URL, became www.theonlybandever.com, which... seriously, how did no other band beat them to that one? Nonetheless, Alexisonfire, the adult star, was not amused and threatened legal action against the band. Only problem was, she had never registered her name as a trademark, therefore nothing became of it, and the band went ahead with the name. Alexisonfire, the band, continue using their Only Band Ever URL to this day, while the alexisonfire.com domain is now back up for grabs. If the band is watching this right now, boys, I am just throwing that out there. In their earlier days, the band would play shows in basements, legion halls, art spaces, and punk houses, among other such environments, on bills alongside primarily hardcore and metalcore acts. Alexisonfire's promotional strategies in the early days were also as DIY as you could get, with their first demo infamously being wrapped in Jesse's old homework from his math class, fittingly named the Math Sheet Demos. Each copy of those demos, recorded in a Niagara Falls basement studio, would be a burned CD wrapped in a different page of Jesse's math notes, with the band numbering the tracks by hand before selling them for $3 at their shows. Eventually, Mitch Joel, a Montreal-based publicist and music writer, and Greg Below, a concert promoter, sound engineer, and then studio manager at EMI Music Publishing Canada, reached out to the band, expressing interest in signing them to a new label they were starting called Distort Entertainment. Through his sound engineering work, Below, a St. Catharines native whom the band had given one of their math sheet demos to, had already met Dallas a few years prior, and gave the band free studio time to record parts of their first album with. Below wound up producing the band's self-titled debut, even once declaring that each member of Alexisonfire could be stars in their own right one day. The band's sound is described by George as, quote, two Catholic high school girls in mid-knife fight, which is exactly what's depicted on their debut album cover, shot by George himself. After signing to Distort in Canada and legendary post-hardcore label Equal Vision in the States, home to bands like Converge, Alexisonfire released their self-titled debut album in Canada on Halloween 2002. Promotion for the band at that time was powered largely by word of mouth and frequent airplay on MuchMusic, who'd put their videos for Pulmonary Archery, Counterparts and Number Them, and Water Wings in heavy rotation on both the main channel and its rock-focused specialty channel, Much Loud. The band's first ever show in Toronto, though not a packed house by any means, was attended by none other than George Strombolopoulos. Legend has it that Strombo bought a t-shirt at the gig and would then start playing the band's videos on The Punk Show, which he was hosting, before those videos eventually hit MuchMusic's countdown. Of course, George Pettit's ferocious screams and Dallas's emotionally wrought lyricism and vocal delivery, and how well they complemented one another despite that stark contrast, would see the band dubbed as a Screamo act. But even with an angelic-sounding clean singer in Dallas and the gruff-voiced Wade meeting him and George somewhere in the middle, a band led by a full-time screamer is still a mighty hard sell for many music fans. I mean, imagine your parents walking in on you listening to them and the first sound they hear is something like... Normally, bands like these didn't, and still don't, get to taste mainstream success. One could think of George and Dallas's dynamic as being the musical equivalent to the French bird meme. Dallas is the delicate, soft-spoken canary, George the squawking, ear-splitting raven. Radio in Canada also found them challenging to promote. Despite buzz accumulating both within their scene and on MuchMusic, and that first album eventually going gold in Canada, the band wouldn't get much support from commercial radio during their first two album cycles, with Toronto's Edge 102 relegating lead single Accidents to late night play only. This was despite the fact that numerous Canadian radio programmers loved listening to them in their off time.
People from radio stations were coming out telling us we were their favorite band, and then I would ask them why they don't play us on their station and say we can't.
Said Dallas around the time of Watch Out's release, quote, "There's still a lot of shit that people like. There's still a lot of radio rock out there, so I don't know if the radio stations are going to be forced to play us because people are still listening to Evanescence and Nickelback. And we don't really care. We haven't got any love from radio yet, and it's not going to affect us. We're doing okay." The band's earlier years were also defined by heavy touring, having played roughly 300 shows a year before recording their second album. Writing songs for Watch Out began in January 2004 while touring the US, after which the band spent a month practicing 8 hours a day to get those new songs down. By that time, the band's style had evolved, and they had a better idea not of what they wanted to do musically, but what they didn't want to do. Right after finishing their tour, and 2 weeks before going back on the road for much of the next 2 years to come, Alexisonfire recorded their sophomore LP, Watch Out. Entering the process armed with new ideas, including ones held over from their debut, the boys linked up with producer Julius Juice Buddy, with whom George and Dallas had both previously worked. They recorded the album at Juice's home studio in Smithville, Ontario, just outside Hamilton. Tapping him for Watch Out marked the beginning of a long-standing partnership between Juice and the band, a George Martin to their Beatles. Much like their debut, writing for Watch Out was done largely in Wade's mother's basement in St. Catharines, including lead single Accidents. Wade has even said them closing their debut album with Pulmonary Archery was setting the tone for the moodier and more atmospheric sonic textures Watch Out would double down on, heavily influenced by post-rock outfits like Scotland's Mogwai and the Midwest emo four-piece, the Appleseed Cast. The band didn't have the money to work with a big-name rock producer, which those in their circle had been wanting them to do, so it wasn't a must for them. They mainly wanted someone to enhance their pre-existing ideas, and Juice was that someone, constantly challenging them to improve. According to George, the songs recorded for Watch Out were more structured, whereas their debut had meshed numerous, often disparate parts together into whole songs, many without a chorus. On Watch Out, they tried in earnest to write songs with proper sing-along hooks. Given how they'd toured primarily with hardcore and metalcore acts during the first album cycle, cranking up the melodic elements of their sound became a goal of Alexisonfire's for Watch Out. While the first album was defined by George's screams with Dallas's clean vocals sounding buried in the mix, Dallas is heard much more clearly this time, getting more opportunities to shine on the mic. Even George's screams sound noticeably different, as Juice had tried many different microphones before finding a handheld Sennheiser mic that matched both George and the sound they wanted. George also said this about his experience working with Juice. Working with him changed my vocals, and it changed how we wrote and recorded music. I think the first record cost us maybe a couple grand to make. We used this free recording room at EMI Publishing in off hours, basically whenever we could get in there. We recorded the drums somewhere else completely, so it was a real hodgepodge. We were new to the whole process. We didn't know how it worked. And then when it came to making the second album, we worked with someone who did know how it worked. He had this amazing setup in his house. He knew exactly how to make it sound the way we wanted it to. He was just a very competent engineer and producer, so he helped us out a lot. In mid-April of 2004, Alexisonfire announced the impending release of their sophomore album, Watch Out. Let's break each track down. So much of what defines Alexisonfire as a band and Watch Out as an album can be found on Accidents alone. It's full of woe chants and musical left turns like the extended bridge with Dallas's echoing vocals and Steele's bass riffs both taking center stage. Quite the epic transition from George screaming about the unsavory, disinfectant-heavy aroma of hospital waiting rooms. The guitar intro is also perhaps the most instantly recognizable in the band's history. One inspired by the intro from Big Guns by Skid Row, whose greatest hits compilation the band was listening to frequently while touring, and whose frontman was fellow Canadian Sebastian Bach. Despite releasing Watch Out in June, the video for Accidents didn't come out until late July. George, Dallas, Wade, and Steele each play paramedics in an ambulance driving around Toronto, eventually noticing their bandmate Jesse lying bloodied and bruised on the sidewalk, bringing him onto the ambulance to operate on him. It remains arguably the band's most iconic clip. Alongside Accidents, this does a bang-up job of helping set the tone for the rest of the album early. In fact, it's one of the songs that made me personally fall in love with Alexisonfire in the first place. It's also one of the first songs to really put Dallas's vocals front and center. Control is melodically one of the band's finest songs, with lyrics interpreted as being about either addiction or just being your true authentic self. George sets an ominous tone with the hook, then Dallas gets all the verses basically to himself, with Wade adding some epic backing vocals as well. Also, that part where almost everything goes silent for Dallas before the big transition back to rocking. Whoosh, I love it. Yes! Here, we see the first of 3 tracks on this album taking explicit lyrical influence from several short stories by legendary American author Kurt Vonnegut, from his series Welcome to the Monkey House. It Was Fear of Myself That Made Me Odd specifically borrows from Report on the Barnhouse Effect, about a professor named Arthur Barnhouse who's magically able to move objects and change his environment using mind control. The song doesn't make reference to any specific passage in the story, but the band still take the Barnhouse storyline and weave it in with their own ideas. We also see the track go in all kinds of directions, from Dallas's mellow intro section to the hard-rocking tempo change, then to another Dallas-led part with George helping out, then to Jesse and Steele's hyper-rhythmic bass and drum-only section, then to a post-hardcore outro with George taking it home. A structural roller coaster and one without a chorus, but that's often what the best Alexisonfire songs are. The increased emphasis on Dallas's vocals led to George questioning what his long-term role in the band would be. This feels most blatantly obvious on Watch Out's fourth track, the George Free Sidewalk When She Walks. In a sense, the song was a preview for fans of what a Dallas Green solo project would eventually sound like, albeit one with the Alexisonfire sound still fully intact. The lyrics are full of naughty innuendo, Dallas's voice is in top form, and the song is an example of the band's more ambient, soundscapey influences rubbing off on them. Some songs have incredibly abstract hidden meanings that allude to something far deeper than meets the eye. Hey It's Your Funeral Mama is not one of those songs. Why? Because it's about go-karting. Literally just go-karting. Yeah. George has said the song references a poorly run go-karting track which a teenage George once skidded off of when one of his wheels suddenly flew off. An unfortunate but pretty hilarious origin story. The music video features the boys teaching an army of lookalikes how to play their respective instruments and how to be convincing stand-ins and Wait a second, that's not Jesse. More on that later. Also, that group high five at the very end of the clip, legendary. The second song on Watch Out to reference a short story from Welcome to the Monkey House is also the only one to turn its source material's title into a hook. Yes, the Hamlet referencing title of the story Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, initially titled The Big Trip Up Yonder, is heavily used by Dallas here, and much like some of the tracks we just discussed, his vocals very much take center stage despite George getting things started and later adding memorable parts of his own. No Transitory has been interpreted as being about depression, self-harm, or even Macbeth and the Weather Underground. But whatever the case, it's one of the more memorable tracks on Watch Out, so it's not a surprise to me that they made it into a single. Notably, its video would be the last time we see Jesse Inglevics with the band behind the kit. Again, I'll touch more on that soon.
St. Catharines Psychiatric Helpline, this is Nancy.
From the moment you hear the lady from the St. Catharines Psychiatric Helpline answering the phone, followed by a guy rambling on the other end about his psychosis, it's clear that this song is about mental illness and especially anxiety, since it's framed as a critique of therapists and telephone helplines.
I'm sure this is all gonna sound really ridiculous, and
Sharks in Danger was one of the first songs the band wrote for the album, but it's a clear sonic step forward from their debut. It's meant to be a bit unsettling and anxiety-inducing, and it's delivered in an atmospheric, almost wall of sound-like package.
As life hangs beside me.
Some moments especially stand out to me, particularly the part where it falls mostly silent and we hear the guy on the phone say,
I'll never sleep.
before getting right back into it. Also, George's delivery of the words razor wire at the end right before we hear the phone hang up. Goated post-hardcore outro. You'll be especially excited for this one, horror fans. That girl possessed is interpreted as referencing Regan McNeil from The Exorcist, and what happens to her while she's possessed by the demon Pazuzu. This is in keeping with Alexisonfire's propensity for pop culture references in their songs, dating as far back as the Blue Velvet referencing 44 caliber love letter.
Hussin' your love letter. Straight from my heart, f***er. You know what a love letter is? It's a bullet from a f***ing gun, f***er.
This is a 44 caliber love letter straight from my heart.
The song is actually what inspired the album cover of the terrified, screaming woman with skeleton hands surrounded by scarier and less fleshy skeletons. The cover was designed and illustrated by tattoo artist Justin Winstanley, who'd previously done some of Dallas's tattoos. Warning that the song does have some poorly aged lyrics and potentially triggering subject matter that I definitely cannot repeat in this video without getting demonetized, but musically it fits nicely with the rest of the album. Based on both the title and literally the second line of the song, it's pretty obvious what White Devil is about. Coca-Cola! No, I'm totally not using that as a euphemism so I don't get demonetized. Don't get it twisted though, the band are advising listeners against it, not glorifying it. George had seen it becoming a problem among youth in the band's native St. Catharines, saying this at the time, quote, "It's so lame. It's something you shouldn't mess around with, especially when you consider all the horror stories. We're not a straight edge band. Everybody drinks and has a good time, but we know where to draw the line." George has also described that trend as being fashionable among those people, and that's reflected in the lyrics. Sure, all your friends will think you're really hip, but the risk still outweighs the reward. A song so catchy you completely forget the flagrantly incorrect grammar in its title. Get Fighted was actually the first song the band wrote for Watch Out, and it's probably the danciest one, both musically and lyrically.
So make sure you love like you can. Waste your time. Something when it drops down.
George's section that's almost like an emo dance floor pep rally is truly epic. And the upbeat rhythm feels tailor-made for fans walking in circles before breaking out into a full-on mosh pit. It's also a song that lyrically has aged like a fine wine, critiquing what George called a, quote, message board mentality among people, a toxic online dynamic that totally hasn't gotten much worse in the 20 years since. Quote, "I was sick of kids with insecurities, kids persecuting kids because they didn't dress a certain way or didn't have the right dance moves, and that's not what we're about. It was about us getting sick of going to shows and seeing kids there who didn't really care about music." A song about truly living life to the fullest and dancing one's insecurities away hasn't often sounded this electrifying. This song is not about pants, shirts, or especially hair. It's simply and truly about having a good fucking time. This song is one of the band's crowning musical achievements, one the band has frequently closed their concerts with. Dallas has even declared it as his favorite Alexis track ever. Once again, the influence of Welcome to the Monkey House looms large. This time it's from the short story The Eufeo Question, about a man who builds a machine sending signals from space that can keep people happy at all times. As you can imagine, things don't end particularly well. Many of the song's lyrics, including its title, literally borrow from dialogue in the story. also references to another short story from Monkey House, More Stately Mansions. Musically, there is so much to like about Happiness by the Kilowatt. A fast intro before transitioning into a slightly slower and more rhythmic vibe, all three vocalists getting chances to shine, those swirling guitars in the chorus, those layered backing vocals, that epic finish. Happiness by the Kilowatt is Alexisonfire at their most atmospheric, their most self-assured, their most expansive, their most inspired, and at their best, period. They couldn't have dreamt of a better song to close this album's curtain with. After announcing it 6 weeks earlier, Watch Out was released in Canada on June 8th, 2004. The same day one of Alexisonfire's contemporaries from New Jersey dropped their sophomore album, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. That band is called My Chemical Romance, you may have heard of them. While Alexis's debut only made it to number 127 on the Canadian Albums Chart, Watch Out debuted all the way up at number 6, and would be certified platinum in Canada 3 years later. Said Dallas at the time, "We had high expectations for sales, but not that high. We didn't think we would scan almost 7,000 copies in our first week. We didn't have a new video. This was the result of word of mouth and some TV commercials." Alexisonfire won the Juno Award for Best New Group thanks to Watch Out, and they also played their first shows in the UK. Pleasantly surprised to learn their tour there was sold out and that people knew the words to their songs. This was after being unsure both of how they'd be received and if their album had even been released in Britain at all. Alexisonfire's first shows in Australia and Japan also happened during this cycle. Meanwhile, Dallas would release a couple solo EPs of material that didn't quite fit Alexisonfire's sound. The name he'd call himself, very literally his own, City and Color. More on that project later. Before the Watch Out cycle had ended, though, drummer Jesse Inglevics took time off from touring with Alexisonfire for personal reasons before officially leaving the band in June 2005. He was replaced by Jordan Hastings, nicknamed Ratbeard, formerly of Burlington's ska punk outfit Jersey. Ratbeard filled in for Inglevics during his break before having the interim tag removed and first appeared with the band at that year's MMVAs, making his first music video appearance alongside a bunch of lookalikes in the clip for Hey It's Your Funeral Mama. Both Jersey and Alexisonfire had toured across Canada together previously, with Jersey disbanding in April 2005 due to creative differences. With not much time left before Alexis's next tour, and despite being used to playing a completely different style of music, Hastings learned 13 songs within a week and joined the band for a run in the US supporting Rise Against before jetting off to Europe. Though the split between Inglevics and the rest of the band was initially amicable, it didn't take long to sour, with Jesse allegedly saying some less than flattering things about his ex-bandmates after his departure. The lyrics of Alexisonfire's Keep It On Wax from their third album Crisis are aimed at Jesse, with Wade having some choice words for him before and after playing the track during a 2007 show in Birmingham, England.
In a perfect world, maybe our old drummer wouldn't have died in an avalanche and we wouldn't have had to write this song about him. But we did, and it's called Keep It On Wax. Rest in peace, Jesse Inglevics.
In support of Watch Out, Alexisonfire would also tour with American bands like Hawthorne Heights, Emery, and Armor for Sleep, as well as fellow Canucks like Silverstein and Boys Night Out, both from Burlington, Ontario, and their good friends in Moneen from Brampton. Speaking of Moneen, they and Alexis, with Ratbeard now on drums, teamed up for the Switcheroo EP, where both bands would cover 2 of each other's songs while adding 1 original each. In this case, Moneen did Accidents and Sharks in Danger. The Watch Out cycle ended in late 2005 with the band touring Canada alongside fellow Screamo titans The Used and Under Oath. What a freaking time that was. The success of a Screamo band in mainstream Canadian music opened doors for similarly hard-edged bands that otherwise might never have been built in the first place. Bands like Comeback Kid, Protest the Hero, and the Cancer Bats, the latter of whom had an early cosign from George himself, were soon to gain commercial steam in the years immediately following Watch Out. Most recently, the album's artwork was immortalized in a tifo by fans of the MLS soccer club Toronto FC. Even greater commercial heights were to come for Alexisonfire Alexisonfire post Watch Out. Their third album, 2006's Crisis, debuted at number 1 in Canada, and its follow-up, 2009's Old Crow's Young Cardinals, peaked at number 2, kept off the top spot by the Black Eyed Peas. Fast forward to today, and each of Alexisonfire's first 4 albums have gone platinum in Canada. Internationally, their results have varied. Replicating their homegrown success south of the border has proven very difficult, as their highest charting album in the US, Old Crow's Young Cardinals, peaked at number 81, while the Canadian chart-topping Crisis only got to number 189 stateside. Nevertheless, they've built considerable followings in other countries, specifically the UK and Australia. But the most passionate Alexis fanbase outside of Canada might just be Brazil, where they played for the first time ever during their 9-show farewell tour.
Craziest show was Brazil, was Sao Paulo. We never played there. We always knew the band had a lot of fans there, and it was kind of our Beatles moment when we went, and it was, we had to be like ushered into the club with like intense security because everyone was flipping out.
Another thing that happened post-Watch Out was Dallas's acoustic solo project, City and Color, starting with the 2005 album Sometimes, the first release from Alexisonfire's manager Joel Carrier's new label, Dine Alone. Offstage, Dallas gained additional recognition in Canada through his marriage to then MuchMusic VJ, Leah Miller. As his solo endeavors got bigger and bigger, Dallas decided to leave Alexisonfire after the Old Crow's Young Cardinals cycle to focus full-time on City and Color. Even if managing 2 successful projects at once became too much for Dallas, it still came as a surprise to his bandmates. The remaining members would try to find a replacement, with Wade traveling to Texas to meet with At the Drive-In and Sparta's Jim Ward to gauge his interest in joining. But Dallas proved irreplaceable, and Alexisonfire officially announced in August 2011 that they were breaking up, on terms that, according to George, were not really amicable. Alexis would, however, do a farewell tour with Dallas in tow, capped off by their final show at Copps Coliseum in Hamilton, Ontario, in front of a sold-out crowd in 2012. Dallas's fame as a folkier and more accessible solo artist has eclipsed that of his band, a trajectory that possibly began with him getting bigger vocal parts on Watch Out. But frankly, that part of his and Alexisonfire's story deserves its own video. Meanwhile, Wade released a solo project with help from George and Ratbeard under the name Black Lungs, before a stint replacing Frank Carter as the frontman of British punk's Gallows. George spent his off-time fronting the band dead tired while pursuing a career as a professional firefighter in Oshawa, Ontario. But alas, their quote-unquote breakup only wound up being a 3-year hiatus, as Alexisonfire announced in March 2015 that they were reuniting for a string of dates in Canada, the US, and the UK. From then on, they'd continue touring and releasing new music, initially as individual singles. Then finally, we'd hear the boys drop a full body of work in 2022 with their 5th album, Otherness. Though it still didn't click with fans the way their first 3 albums did, I'll happily argue in favor of it being the most underrated album in the band's catalog. It also earned Alexis a huge hit on Canada's alternative and rock charts with Sans Soleil. The band also haven't forgotten their roots, as they now host an annual festival called Born and Raised, named for the Old Crow's Young Cardinals song, in their native St. Catharines. Past editions have seen them perform their entire debut LP in full, though they've still yet to give Watch Out the same treatment. In fact, George told Vice in 2016 that it's not an album he ever revisits, or even feels any attachment to anymore, ranking it 4th out of the band's 6 releases at that point. Quote, "I made my peace with this record a little while ago. I took it out into the woods and set it free in proper dramatic Harry and the Hendersons-esque fashion. There is a certain lovability to this record, much like Harry the Beloved Sasquatch, but it's just not practical to have it in the house. Before you know it, it will be throwing onion dip at the Three Stooges on the television and f***ing up all your door frames. I had to make the decision to cut ties. While I have some extremely fond memories of Watch Out, I don't think I can ever listen to it again. It's relegated to my memory now. I didn't even listen to it in preparation for this conversation. I seem to remember it had some good songs and some nice little melodic instrumental interludes, but honestly, it just doesn't sound like a record that I would listen to today. But even if their frontman may have a complicated relationship with it, Alexisonfire's continued success and adoration admiration from fans couldn't have been built up to where it is now without Watch Out helping along the way. It's a sonically richer and more developed, and admittedly more polished, version of the band, both musically and in terms of production, than what you'd hear on their first LP. It's an album full of pure aggression, roaring woe chants, carefully placed tempo and time signature changes, and Alexisonfire truly starting to scale the height of their musical and commercial powers, proving a post-hardcore / Screamo band could be marketed to the masses. Not bad at all for a band from a mid-sized Ontario city, whose style is inherently not for everyone, whose unlikely rise to prominence is all the more impressive because of it, and whose members decided to start a new band right after all their old ones split up. Thanks so much for watching. What did you think of this video? What's your favorite song from Watch Out, or your favorite Alexisonfire song in general? What's your favorite Alexis album? Which other albums or artists should I make these kinds of videos about? Please let me know in the comments below, and if you're new here, be sure to share, like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. This has been Sound and Vision, and I'll see you next time.